Alors, une fois n'est pas coutume, c'est moi qui vais poser la première question. J'aimerais quand même que Jacques, qui parle parfaitement français, nous explique ce que c'est que la FIRA. C'est peut-être pas évident pour tout le monde. On se prend 1 minute pour l'expliquer? Allez, je vous laisse le plateau.
C'est bon? Just a few words in French for my colleagues. Bonjour à tous, Jacques Creyssel, je dirige la Fédération du commerce et des distributions française et je suis par ailleurs le président de la Fédération internationale du retail. La Fédération internationale du retail a été créée par la NRF et rassemble plus de 40 fédérations dans le monde, absolument sur tous les continents, puisque nous avons, à partir de cette année, un représentant d'Afrique, c'est la première fois, avec un représentant du Maroc, mais nous avons absolument tout le monde. Et c'est un endroit où nous discutons de tous les grands sujets, 2 fois par an, concernant le retail. Une fois à New York et une fois dans un pays. On a la chance d'être cette année ici. And I have the pleasure to welcome on behalf of FIRA my 2 friends. So Shay, who is the President and CEO of NRF, National Retail Federation, who is the big boss of US retail and who has created our organization. So we are very proud to have him today. And Paul is my vice president in the organization, and he's a very important man in Australia. He's leading as chairman the National Online Retail Association, and he has many responsibilities in his country, and I am very happy to have him and to have Matt, of course, with us. And I think that together we try to have a lot of things, to do a lot of things. So Matt will begin. So we have just half an hour. And not for each of us. So Matt, what are your key issues now? And then Paul will say a few words, and I will conclude. And of course, if you have questions, we will answer to them. Matt.
Thank you, Jack, and good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be here and with Paul and other friends from around the world, and here at Paris Retail Week to feel the energy of being together again, and hopefully continue the transformation and the recovery both here and in other retail businesses around the world. We're certainly pleased to have the opportunity. And so, Jacques, I think I would just say from the U.S. side, we face many of the same kinds of challenges of supply chain and inflation and increasing prices and the lingering effects of COVID in terms of the way the industry is transformed and consumers have changed their behavior. And we saw a very rapid recovery from COVID in the U.S. Economically in 2021, and that's been very good in 2022, but inflation continues to be a real challenge. And so when we think of retail in the U.S., we think first of the consumer and consumer health and strength and behavior. And so just to take each one of those, I guess I would say, generally speaking, in the U.S., consumers are economically, financially healthy, even relative to where we were pre-COVID in 2019. So we have substantial excess savings that consumers possess. Household wealth has increased. Notwithstanding inflation challenges, we've seen wages continue to improve. So consumers are healthy and they're strong in the sense that they continue to power economic activity in terms of their spending. Counterintuitively, in 2020, when we all thought consumerism would be dead, in the US at least, we saw retail grow by 7% in 2020, even in the midst of COVID, in the worst days of coronavirus crisis. And last year in 2021, retail sales in the US grew by almost 15%. So in 2 years, we've seen retail sales growth of more than 20%. And that has, of course, put pressure on the supply chain. It's put increased pressure on wages. And so it's been hard to get out of the cycle of the supply and demand challenges because of this very strong consumer behavior, which goes back to some of the unique solutions, if you want to call them that, prescriptions in the U.S. to help consumers in our economy by putting trillions of dollars into the economy, which of course overstimulated demand, too much money chasing too few goods, and 26, 28 months on, now we have very high inflation. So our forecast for the year is that retail sales will grow in the U.S. between 6 and 8%. We are currently already on track through the month of August. Through those 8 months, we've seen growth of almost 7.5%. So very robust consumer engagement. Much of that is back to early parts of the year. Certainly it's changing in the economy, less in the discretionary certain categories and much more to food costs and energy costs and things like that. But we feel confident we'll finish the year. And against all of that is the backdrop of the changed consumer behavior. We know from strength and health, consumers are in a place, but their behavior has changed and evolved. And I think attending an event like this one, or our event in January in New York that both of you and many of you have attended before, we see the nature of servicing and serving consumers is evolving because their behavior has changed, and it's a much more digitized experience. And we see consumers want to be present and in person and physically engaged in commerce, but they expect a different kind of an experience in a store from a merchant with regard to the way in which they're going to behave, and their expectations have been increased for the value that they expect to get in return. So it continues to be challenging and complex, transformative time. I think the U.S. view, balanced against those challenges, is that if we could perform as well as we did during COVID, that we can manage through the challenges of the future. High-performing companies will find opportunity there and continue to outperform their competitors in the market, and others will either evolve and try to compete, or they will not. So overall, I think the picture is generally positive, but not without our challenges.
And the increase of energy costs for retailers, is it a key issue for you as it is, for instance, in Europe?
It is, and it continues to be. We've had 78 straight days of declining gasoline, petrol prices. Ours are already much lower than yours here in Europe. So energy is an issue, but again, I think I'll go back months ago when Christine Lagarde made an observation, and she said both in the EU and in the US we face inflationary pressures, but in the EU they're primarily about energy and what's happening at the war in Ukraine, and in the US it's primarily about our very stimulative fiscal and monetary policy, which spurred demand, which led to inflation.
Paul, what in Australia?
Lovely. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you again, Jacques, for hosting us and our colleagues from FIRA in this beautiful city of yours. And of course, Matt, thanks to you and your team for everything you do. As Jacques introduced me, I chair the National Online Retailers Association, which is why I'm not wearing a tie, if that's okay, you know, online retail, but cool. But I'd also like to shout out quite a few of my colleagues here from FIRA, including Paul Zaro, he's the CEO of Australia's peak body, the Australian Retailers Association. It's been around 100 years. NORA has been around 10 years. So I was going to say, if you've got any heavyweight questions, please chat to Paul, because he's got a team of economists and, you know, he's got all the data to hand. I guess what I'm always grateful to both of you for is that the hat that I wear, the ecosystem I serve, is online retailers, and certainly in Australia, who identify the global opportunity. So I'm a big fan of global retailers. I know you are too. The flat world is very much our friend, not our foe. And certainly for a small country like Australia with a small population and so remote, it's just been absolutely thrilling to see our brands go global. And you'll see them increasingly on the high street. You'll see them online. And just as importantly, seeing your brands come into Australia. You know, Decathlon, for example, is just taking Australia by storm. It's probably one of our fastest growing, you know, physical retailers. And of course, the US has a very strong retail base in Australia. So I couldn't be happier about the way retail is changing and evolving, and certainly the global opportunity where our customer count grows so dramatically because we're now hyper-connected really through events like this, and thanks to the Comexposium team for putting on such a great show. It was lovely to walk around the booth. And also, obviously, technology that's connecting us. I guess, Jacques, what I really wanted to say is first of all, declaring that I have a bit of an optimism bias. So those stats are very encouraging. And what for me is more encouraging is that you can't move in Paris. It's crowded, it's busy, it's buzzing. And I get a strong sense, even a show like this, that we're getting our life back. And I predict a very big show in New York in January. Here's hoping. I think we've had a few tough years, all of us, as an industry, as individuals. And I just can't help getting the sense that it's coming back, and hey, it's coming back strongly. I think the point, Matt, that you made the most that resonated with me is that our household balance sheets in a lot of these strong tier 1 economies is very strong. Australia just got declared today we're the world's richest people on the planet. Although after the airfare here, I don't feel like the world's richest person on the planet because airfares are exploding. But what's my point is we've got strong personal balance sheets. We've had good house appreciation, as I know you've had in the US and here in France. But we certainly got to give our customers a good reason to shop. So perhaps there is a sense of sobriety amongst our retail leaders that we might have to work a bit harder, maybe even for a bit less over the short term. But we really are going to be in good shape. That's notwithstanding, obviously, the current challenges, which I won't go into. We obviously know the world's got some uncertain periods. And the point that I would just like to make, Jacques, and we did when we last had our FIRA meetup, we spoke about a few things. I just want to raise again the human situation. I think we still have to deal with mental health coming out of COVID. I think for a lot of us, we felt isolated. I think we've had a rapid increase in anxiety and depression from that isolation. I think we're coming out of it, and sunlight's a great disinfectant, as we know, but we've still got work to do on that. I think the big thematic, obviously, coming out of Australia and the globe, and that's why I'm so excited about the flat world, is sustainability, and I'm sure Jacques and his team will be speaking more about that. So for me, it's about people and the planet, it's our health and well-being, and it's certainly about making sure we're here for our children and our children's children.
Thank you, Paul. Maybe a few words about France and maybe Europe, because we have the same subjects in many European countries. We face at the same time three kinds of issues. The first one is short-term issues, as everyone. We have inflation, of course, with the changing of the consumption, of the behavior of consumers. But now the problem of the increasing of energy costs is clearly very important. We had a meeting with our government last Friday, and I told them that it can represent around 40% of the EBITDA of many companies. And for some stores, it means that the margin will be negative next year. Because all the stores and all the chains had the contracts of long term, but these contracts are being renegotiated now. And of course, increases a minimum of 2 times, 3 times the former price, and sometimes the spot price, which is 10 times. Yeah. So as the energy cost is representing now 1/3 of the margins, it means that it's clearly a very critical point for many companies and retail companies in Europe. When you add to these short problems, the fact that, of course, we have structural changings. Yeah. The first one is the fact that our business model is changing. Our business model was based on rapid growth, on a low price of real estate, and so on and so on. All that has changed. We know that for foods, for instance, now we have a very low growth, if we have growth. Many for apparel, for spendings, decreases. So we have clearly a change of business model. At the same time, we have to change from the business model we have to an omni-channel model. And of course, it's not exactly the same. It costs a lot. It's clearly another world. And when you add to that all what is concerning the digitalization of our companies, the subject of data, the subject of what we call the Uberization of many tasks to split the value chain. In fact, we have the risk to keep only the low margin task and to lose the other ones. When you add all that, it means that it's clearly a new world.
Yeah.
And the third main issue we have is the fact that, of course, retail, wholesale, and especially retail, is clearly at the center of the society.
Yeah.
So when you look at the subject of planet you mentioned, we have clearly a very important role to play. And we play it on at least three subjects. The first one is waste, fight against waste. We see that waste is not in our stores. It's very often at home or before when at the level of the production of the goods. But people are looking at us. So we must improve. We do a lot of things, but we must improve what we do. The second subject is about the circular economy. We have to we saw in the during the exhibition a lot of new tools to give information via mobile phone and so on to consumers, because we have at the same time an obligation to have less packaging and more information. So it's clearly a subject. And of course, the recycling of goods is clearly more and more something very much very important, especially for consumers. And our last point is, of course, the subject of decarbonation. And I'm always surprised to see that the subject of decarbonation is not at the center of many of our discussions, especially with our suppliers. When you look, for instance, for grocery retail, it's clear that what is our responsibility, what is called Scope 1 and Scope 2, it's only 5% of the total. And what is the subject of the related to the products, related to the way of consumption of products, is 95%. So we have a bit more than 20 years to have the net zero goal. So we must work on that, and very often we don't work. And very often the industry doesn't work very much. Some of them, of course, work, but we do not work together. So the common word to all these key issues for me is investment. We must invest more. We have in France what we call les assises du commerce. It was during 1 month. We were together, all the retailers, the government, trade unions, and so on, consumer organizations, to think about the future of retail. And it was very interesting. Unfortunately, we have no decisions for the government, but because we had elections, so we hope that the new government will take some decisions now. But what was interesting is that it was all what I said. We had a common conclusion, which was we have to double our investment level. Today, the level of investment in retail is 2% of capex compared to turnover. We must go from 2 to 4. When you look at Amazon, for instance, Amazon was in 2019 to 6%. Now it's 12% in 3 years. The budget of investment of Amazon this year is $60 billion per year. It's more than all the research effort in France for the whole country. Yeah. So it means that we must invest more, and at the same time, our margins are decreasing. So that's clearly the main point we have, especially with the energy crisis. But before it was like that, because all the investment we have to do concerning carbon and so on are not a very high level of earnings, and the return on investment is quite low on that. So for us, it's clearly the main subject we have to face, how to double the level of investment. And that's clearly a subject we have to speak with the French state, European Commission, and that's a subject we are dealing with in the level of Eurocommerce, for instance. And we have a board of our organization tomorrow morning, and we'll have a presentation on that, because it's clearly for the European countries a very, very big subject. On this subject, maybe, Matt, is it the subject of how to invest more, how to modernize stores, how to modernize supply chain and to change? Is it something where you discuss, you have plans for that in US?
Yes, absolutely. It is a topic that gets discussed every single day inside our member companies and between and among retailers and their supply chain partners, their CPG partners. And it's a conversation that really is driven in many ways by their customers. All of us as customers and as consumers are inhabitants of planet Earth, and the impact, I think, of the climate changes and transformation we're seeing, I think, is very obvious. But even leaving that aside, I think there is a much more effective way to live in a world in which we are more thoughtful about our supply chains, about the way we source goods, about the manufacturing process. And I think that's a discussion that happens not just from an ESG point of view among a board of directors and its shareholders and its members, but it's also creating operational efficiency, and it creates a competitive advantage in the marketplace. And the companies that are adopting these kinds of behaviors, whether you look at the studies that have been done over time of how those companies perform in the stock market and things like that, I think we all know if you can operate more efficiently any business, you have the chance to put space between yourself and your competitors, and you take market share. And I think in the US, as a general matter, at a high level, it's probably true that the US, for a variety of reasons, is somewhat behind, for example, where Europe is and European companies. Part of that is just the nature of our regulatory system, our political system, consumerism in the US. But it's clearly an issue, particularly in the aftermath of COVID, that is talked about every single day, and every company, not just the people in charge of that particular piece of the business, everyone in a business is thinking about that all the time. It's a constant consideration.
Paul, you are leading an online organization, online retail organization. Maybe a few words about the evolution of the online in Australia after the crisis. Does it change? Did you go back to what you expected before?
Yeah, I'd love to chat about that. And I think just before I do, Matt, you've reminded me, we work, we all of us work in a wonderful industry. I think we're all a bit humbled by the Patagonia founder gesture very recently to gift a company worth billions of dollars to cause, just to give the whole company to cause. And of course, how did he and his team build $1 billion business? On an early pioneer on ESG and sustainability. And I think we'd all have to agree with generational change, those opportunities are going to open up more and more. But that was a marvelous gesture, and I'm sure you know him. He's probably a member of the NRF, but give him a big hug from me, because it's a great story. Online retail had a bit of a lift, I think we all agree, with COVID, the safety, the choice, the variety of home delivery. Australia was in lockdown, so there certainly was a growth. I have the good fortune of working as a non-executive chair at NORA, but also working in a retail role. I'm the chairman of a ASX-listed company called MyDeals, a bit like Wayfair in the US. And in fact, we've just been sold to Woolworths Australia for about $300 million, so that's a good result. But I think that all came from the growth of online. But I think the point I want to make, Jacques, is that we're living in a world now where it's converging. And Matt, you've often spoke about the middle of the field. It's such a powerful, and in fact, you were talking about that years and years ago when you visited us in Australia, that retail is now being played in the middle of the field. And the honeypot of opportunity is in that intersection between physical and digital. What we joke with one of my colleagues is phygital is where the real opportunity lies, Jacques. And so, you know, to me, it's almost, I think again, Matt was, you know, had shop.org as part of his organization, but brought it in-house. You almost don't need it anymore. Now, NORA has a place to play. We're a very important network, and we get great support from Paul and his people. But ultimately now, it's all retail. The customer shops by brand, not by channel. So good retailers are good retailers. Single channel to model market, I think is going to have some challenges in the year ahead. And that's why I supported the board and the shareholders to sell my deal to Woolworths, who have, you know, 15 million loyalty partners and hundreds of stores. I think it's going to be a phygital world. Single channel models to market, I think, are going to be in a bit of trouble. So, yeah, so I think happy days, but, you know, the normal world's back, and that's good. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Y a-t-il une question dans la salle? Is there any question in the room? No question, don't hesitate.
At this end of day,
it's always difficult.
It's been a long day for everyone.
So to end, just a question for you two. What is for you, at the present time, your key short-term problem?
I think our key short-term problem is helping consumers navigate the uncertainty of the economic conditions. And while the consumer is generally speaking healthier than before, and the retail industry is healthier than the last recession in the US in 2008 and 9, there's still going to be real challenges and hardship for American families, for workers, as we get to the other side. And I think the unknown question for us that we think about is what's going to happen with the central bank, the Federal Reserve. How far do they go in raising rates? And then secondarily, but longer term, is the issue of the environment, sustainability, and to your point, maybe retailers only are responsible for 5%, but you get frequently 100% of the blame because that's the physical experience that consumers have, and I think that's going to increasingly be a real challenge for us.
Well,
I'm going to take the cop-out here, the Fifth Amendment. You know, they say retail's detail, and that's, I think, why we all love it. I think there's not one big thing that is with us or against us in retail. I think it's going to be a composite of a lot of challenges. But having said that, disruption and opportunity go hand in hand, and there'll be people in this room that are building their businesses, and we'll see boom times, even over challenging times.
And I will answer to my question too. And for me, our main subject is to consider the short-term and long-term subjects we have to face. When you look at the last 4 years in France, we had the yellow vest period. We had the strikes in the streets where all the center of the towns were blocked because of the strikes. Then we had COVID. Now we have energy cost increase and Ukraine war. So it means that we had a lot of crises. As we say, no normal is new normal now, but very often the crisis is the new normal. And that's really a very big subject because we know that we have to change. We know that we have to invest. And of course, it's more difficult now. And very often, our government in general, and it's very often the same in many European countries, do not understand very well our sector.
Yes.
They think that industry is a marvelous sector. They have killed it, but now it's dead. They think it's clearly the priority. And but retail is the most important employer. We are the center of the life of people. And nobody in our level of our government is very much interested, and I saw on your heads that's quite the same in your countries. So it's one again a common subject we have to face. Thank you to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Merci.
Jacques. Thank you.